Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Here for Good, where we explore how transformational leaders create a positive impact on the world around them. Throughout history, inspirational leaders and organizations have always used the power of words to connect with emotion, galvanize communities, and enlist others in causes for change and good. At Virtua Health, we are changing the way people think and talk about health and well-being. So it is our privilege to tee up meaningful conversations with engaging social catalysts and thought leaders. Please welcome our host, Dennis Pullin, President and CEO of Virtua Health, as he sparks today's exciting conversation.
When you talk with my next guest, you know you'll always get a clear opinion, because with Stephen A., there is rarely a middle ground. He has shared those opinions wide and far, from his days as a reporter and columnist with the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Daily News, to nationally with ESPN and Sirius XM. ESPN has been at the center of his TV career, and his back and forth with fellow commentators have produced many memorable moments, whether it's print, radio, TV, or social media. The venues have changed, but not Stephen A.'s goal, to always remain the same, to be the best and challenge the conventional. Stephen A., welcome to Here for Good.
Thank you so much, Dennis. How you doing?
I'm good.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm glad to have you on. Listen, there's a lot I want to talk to you about today, but I really want to start with you. Tell me what got you involved in journalism, and particularly sports journalism.
Well, for me, being in high school and in college, getting into communications, that was just a given. I was always a good talker, as my mother would say. I came out of the womb running my mouth. And as a result, she always knew I was going to do something where talking was required. That was number one. But number two was when I got left back in elementary school, because I got left back and had to repeat the fourth grade. That was really a salient point in my life, because it was very humiliating. People were laughing at me and ridiculing me. You know how cruel kids can be.
Right.
And so as a result, I remembered that. And those memories stayed with me forever, because suddenly it became incredibly important to me to harbor a level of intelligence, to have some degree of intellect. And
did that fuel your drive and sort of
I think
your
I think so. That, and of course, my mother working as hard as she could, and that she had to raise all of us and to make sure that we had a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food on the table. We grew up very, very poor. And because of that, I knew that in order to get to a point where I would never have to experience this again, and to get to a point where I would be able to ensure that she wouldn't have to experience this in her later years, I had to be a high-end achiever, and I had to be somebody that got the job done and got rewarded for it in some capacity. And so that's where my focus lies.
Now, you didn't start out in TV. You sort of started out as a reporter.
Print.
How did that journey sort of evolve to where you are today?
Well, I started off writing in in college. When I was at Winston-Salem Journal, I wrote for the school newspaper. I wrote for the weekly newspaper. I wrote for the daily newspaper. When I started off my career, I was as an editorial assistant in Greensboro, North Carolina, for the Greensboro News and Records High Point Bureau, before I landed at the New York Daily News, covering high school sports, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, covering college and ultimately pro sports, and ultimately becoming an NBA columnist, and then one of only 21 African Americans in the history of this nation to be labeled a general sports columnist. So those accomplishments were very near and dear to my heart. They were incredibly important to me. And to me, the transition in the television and radio really took fold in 1999. The NBA the players had been locked out by the owners. And for some reason, I had access to a lot of people on the negotiating committee. I knew what was going on. I had inside information, and I was reporting this for the Philadelphia Inquirer. So as a result, everybody wanted to come to me to talk to me on television and radio about the things that I had reported in the newspaper. It elevated my profile, and I quickly realized that I could say more in 3 minutes than I could write with 800 or 900 word articles. And so obviously that was a motivation. Then when I saw the discrepancy in pay between a newspaper reporter and a radio host, and then ultimately a television host, that definitely became even more of a motivation to get involved in these other these other mediums. And so those were the things that facilitated my transition. And when I would go on as a guest on television, particularly in Philadelphia with Comcast, they didn't pay you. But I simply asked for one thing in return. I said I wanted a recording, a copy of every appearance that I've made. And I used that to build my portfolio. So when I presented it to CNN Sports Illustrated at the time, in the spring of 1999, they gave me an audition and hired me on the spot to be their NBA insider. I stayed there for a couple of years before going to Fox Sports, stayed there for a couple of years before ending up at ESPN in 2003. And that's really how it all happened.
So your mother said, you mentioned that she knew you would always be in a profession in which you were talking.
Yeah.
How has your outspokenness either helped or harmed you?
Well, it's done both. When you're younger, you're a bit more rambunctious and you feel the need to speak on everything. Things that don't concern you, things that you're not invited into, things that, quite frankly, are above your pay grade. There are levels to everything. And when you're young, it's rare that you appreciate that. You don't understand that there are people who are older, more experienced, more seasoned, that paid their proverbial dues per se, and are more qualified ultimately to speak on things that you might be knowledgeable enough about, but it doesn't make you more knowledgeable than them. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to have the wherewithal to get things done. And so in that regard, there are times where my mouth has hurt me because I felt the need to speak where my voice was not required and it wasn't necessary. And all I did was alienate the very, very people that I was looking to for assistance. As you get older, you elevate your level of wisdom and knowledge, and you recognize when to pick your battles. You also have a greater sense of self, where you understand your voice, its potency, but more importantly, when it's appropriate to utilize it and when it's not. And that comes with experience, and it comes with tutelage and counseling. I have always been somebody that people have raved about my ability to listen. People who are older, more wise, more experienced, they've endured more. They've had to succumb to a lot of different things. The level of counsel and advice that they give you along the way, if you're smart enough, you take that wisdom, that intellect that they've provided, and you attach it to yourself in a fashion that enables you to be able to choose when it's appropriate and when it's not, and to have the knowledge on how to maneuver. And ultimately, it also forces you to have the mindset to kind of think along the lines of, what am I really, really interested in? Am I interested in speaking, or am I interested in being heard? Am I interested in expressing my emotions, or am I interested in getting things done? And when you get older, that's what you really, really learn. And
it becomes more clear. You start to see it. It unfolds itself in a way that you don't have to force it.
It becomes more clear, no question about it. But you also have to make a decision, because even when it's clear, the ego inside of you is still anxious,
still pushing
to say things and do things. Sometimes it's better off that somebody else does it for you. Sometimes it's better off that you don't expend or exert your energy on this battle. It's better suited for this one because it's more important. These are the kind of things that you learn as things become a bit more clear for you.
So Stephen, then what guidance do you give to people that are trying to sort of develop a path for their own career, particularly those that might be interested in a career in broadcast? Do you take those lessons that you just mentioned and sort of translate that in a way they can use it?
Well, I definitely do that. But I think the most important thing that I try to preach to people on the come up is you got to put in the work. I remember just reading an article yesterday by my colleague, Ramona Shelburne at ESPN. She wrote an article about how the NBA got back in business. And she was telling this story about Chris Paul, the president of the Players Association, who's just an exceptional young man, He's not only a perennial all-star, and I believe to be a future Hall of Famer because I think he's that great as a point guard, but he's incredibly compassionate and passionate about the things that he cares about family, about health, about other things like that. And he's really, really big on relationships. And he's very close friends with a person that I've personally idolized for years. And his name would happen to be Bob Iger, who is the CEO of Walt Disney, who's about to step down in a few months or so, but he's done an incredible job of running Walt Disney for many, many years. And he's obviously my big boss because Walt Disney owns ESPN. And Bob Iger was telling the story about how Chris Paul is an inquisitive individual, and he was the kind of person that was very probing and inquisitive about wanting to know as much as he possibly could know. And he was very, very big on looking for mentorship. And Bob Iger, to paraphrase, was like, don't talk me to death. Don't just talk about it. Be about it. Let's see. It takes two. If I remember his words correctly, he was saying that it takes two. You can talk about wanting a mentor all you want to. I think the line that Bob Iger used, if I remember correctly, was get in line. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of people that say that, but how much do you really mean it? How committed to you are you to doing that? The books that I might tell you to read, the context that I might tell you to make, the network that I might advise you to engage in, all of those different things. Are you willing to do that? Are you committed to doing that? When we have conversations, I'm not going to take just anybody's phone call now. I'm not going to talk to just anybody. I'm a busy man. I got a lot of important things to do. How committed are you? And I love the fact that Bob Iger gave that tidbit of information about his relationship to Chris Paul, who is obviously receptive to those very things. And they've been friends for many years because Chris Paul is a listener, and he is somebody that does not mind imparting whatever wisdom he captures upon anybody who's willing to listen themselves. He's a very, very special guy.
You said an important thing that is relationships. And a lot of people don't understand mentorship is about developing a relationship. It is truly because there is so much give and take, and there's a certain amount of commitment to doing that. I want to switch gears on you just a little bit. The title of this podcast is being here for good. I know you have a passion about a lot of things, and two of which are literacy and the nation's HBCUs. Tell me how that came about.
Well, literacy is simple. I got left back because I couldn't read. I was in the fourth grade with a first grade reading level. I had dyslexia, didn't know it. And kids in the neighborhood thought I was just dumb. And so, for me, because I had gotten left back, they felt that way. And so because of that, that was incredibly embarrassing and humbling to me. And it served as arguably the greatest motivational tool that I ever had in my life, because it was no longer acceptable for me to be uneducated. It wasn't acceptable for me to not prioritize education. I had fantasized about being a professional basketball player when I was a kid. I thought that I had the skills and I could be good enough to pull it off. Obviously, I was lying to myself.
I say, did somebody else tell you didn't have the skills, or was it obvious?
No, it wasn't obvious. I was small. I was very tiny. I was like, even in my senior year in high school, my first year in college, I was like 125, 130 pounds.
Now, you grew up in New York, right?
Hollis, Queens.
So the competition was stiff in the city.
Yeah. And I would smoke them. I would take them out. I could ball. But I wasn't on that level where you see the great players that played in the NBA. No, I was not anything close to that, but I could play. And the thing about it is that it wasn't enough for me. I imagine, like some people imagine shooting hoops and being a star and hearing the roar of the crowd. I imagined being interviewed as a star and I had nothing to say.
Wow.
Or I couldn't articulate my points of view. Or people would look at me and laugh like they did it when I got left back in the fourth grade. And I said, that's not happening. And so because of that, it served for me as a motivational tool, and it's something that I held on to. And literacy is incredibly important to me, and something that I really plan on digging into a bit more heavily within the next year or so in terms of my movement towards elevating literacy in this nation, because I think obviously education is the key to success. And it doesn't mean a college degree or anything like that. It means literally an education, knowing how to read, to write, to comprehend, to know how to communicate and position yourself for greater things in life. that don't involve dribbling a basketball or spewing rap music or things of that nature. There are a multitude of ways to pull those things off, and I believe in that. As it pertains to the other things, when we talk about literacy, is one thing. HBCUs is just me being having gratitude towards my coach, the late Clarence Big House Gaines, God rest his soul, towards our telecommunications director, Mr. Robert Devon, who was a dear friend of mine who passed away years ago, to a retired professor in Maryland, Roseboro, Larry Little, Dr. Brooks Shaw, Dr. Sadler, people at Winston-Salem State who were incredibly instrumental in uplifting me and helping me and taking me under their wing and not helping me just be a better student, but be a better man. And so I owe a debt of gratitude to them and HBCUs, because it was truly the best years of my life to have that education and that environment, that campus life. Oh man, I get goosebumps thinking about it now because that's how much of a good time I had.
So clearly they inspired you.
Yeah.
How do you try to inspire others?
Well, I communicate a lot to kids. I wouldn't say mentor. I'm always there, but so many people come in my direction and I'm working so much, I can't always speak to people as much as they would like me to. I communicate an awful lot with an awful lot of people, but the same people communicating with me, an innumerable number of times, that's virtually impossible for me to pull off with my schedule. So what I try to do is use the platforms that I have on radio, on television, and beyond to really disseminate the same message I would disseminate if I were talking to you one-on-one over the phone or in person. I try to make sure that my message is consistent and that those people know I'm talking to them. That way, those that I can't reach all the time directly, I'm doing that. Obviously, I try to be charitable with my time. I certainly try to do what I can myself and my business manager, Rashawn McDonald, who used to work with Steve Harvey. We did the whole HBCU week thing. That was in existence before we arrived. Those folks at Delaware State did a tremendous job with that. But we came on board, gave it a nationally televised profile and beyond, generated in excess of $4 million in scholarships. And, over 400 people got scholarships as well. And so that was just step one in terms of a bigger movement. I'm not going anywhere. I'm always going to do what I can for HBCUs, and I'm always going to do what I can for the younger generation, because there's no success without a successor.
Well, Stephen A., I can't talk to you without talking about sports. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So and interact with more professional athletes than most. Mm-hmm. What are some of your thoughts around how athletes can or should use their platform for good?
I have no problem. Well, first of all, we have to understand everybody's definition of good is not the same. We'd like it to be that way, but that's just not true. That's not a factual thing. That's not a reality. Some people, good is really, really bringing attention to the inner city, the plight of the inner city and disenfranchised communities. Another person's definition of good is achieving as much success as they possibly can, thereby being in a position where they're able to empower others through employment, and upward mobility in terms of their quality of life and things of that nature. Sometimes it's just encouraging others to speak out because you're doing so yourself. And so for me, I look at professional athletes, I look at the cachet they bring, the power that they wield because of the advent of social media and the fact that they can reach audiences directly. They don't have to depend on the media per se to do so. I think about people like LeBron James, who is just the quintessential role model in terms of how he has conducted himself, the level of expectations that have been placed on his shoulders, and how he has responded and reacted to it all with near sheer perfection, to be quite honest with you. And that serves as a critical inspiration because they have him to lean on. I'm from the Michael Jordan generation. And the fact that I think that Michael Jordan is the greatest player to have ever played basketball doesn't in any way diminish the greatness of LeBron James. And when we talk about LeBron James, we have to think along the lines of the Muhammad Alis, the Kurt Floods, the Jackie Robinsons, and others, not in a literal sense, of course, because Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. Kurt Flood was the father of free agency. Muhammad Ali refused to enter the armed services to fight in the Vietnam War. We know that's not what we're saying LeBron James is. But in the modern day era, having the clout and the cachet and power that he has, yet still having a willingness to speak out on behalf of Black people when Black issues come about, and our disenfranchisement and our absence of potency clearly is an issue unless somebody steps up and brings that to the forefront. His willingness to do so, combined with the commitment that he has shown in terms of building the school in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, being an astute businessman that he is, employing people the way that he has, you just can't say enough about him. He's an incredible, incredible role model. And the NBA is very, very proud to have him. And we will and should all miss him when he's gone, because he has exhibited and exuded nothing short of greatness throughout his tenure in the NBA.
So considering their platform, do you think more athletes should work collectively for things such as social change, or do you think this should be solely an individual journey, much like what LeBron has done?
No, I think it should be collective. And even though I say LeBron is at the forefront, LeBron doesn't work by himself. Usually he's working collectively with others to do things. He's just the most empowered voice because they can't touch him the way that they can touch other people and make them feel that pinch. You ain't going to pinch him, but so much. In terms of players working collectively, I'd give you a perfect example of where that's absolutely necessary. There's a video out right now that a few NFL players put forth, talk about Black Lives Matter, and we deserve to be treated better. When will it end? When will you listen? That kind of thing that they were saying to the white establishment, by and large, in this country. You need that kind of collective effort. One voice ain't going to get it done. When you hear people talking about Colin Kaepernick, everybody was talking about, well, we should side with Colin Kaepernick. What about now? Look at this happen. And my response was, where were y'all? Y'all brought up Eric Garner. That happened in 2014. You brought up Tamir Rice. That happened in 2015. You brought up Walter Scott. That happened around 2015, if I remember correct. I think, excuse me if I confused the years between 2014 and 2015. I don't have it in front of me. I don't remember that right now. But there's been a plethora of instances that happened years ago, before and in the immediate aftermath of Colin Kaepernick protesting. Well, then why was it that only 11 out of 1,600 plus players joined him in taking the knee initially? Why, even after the president called your sons of bitches and said that all of you should be fired, why was it that only 200 plus players took a knee as opposed to league-wide? You willing to take that position? And why did you stop? What'd you do that for? Because you were convinced that it was going to affect the bottom line in a detrimental fashion, which ultimately meant it was going to affect you in a detrimental fashion, and you were reticent. That's the reality. And so knowing that, when we talk about coming together, let's make sure you come together, because they can't come at all of y'all. If they can come at individuals, but if you stand together collectively in unison, that's more potent, it's more powerful, and more important for them to get at you for it. They'll have to be more flagrant in addressing the issue in that fashion, which they will be highly reluctant to do, because it will definitely highlight their level of insensitivity. That's how you got to see things.
Yeah, well, great. So as we try and carefully and I think safely reopen our country and reactivating the economy, which we all know is extremely important. So basketball is coming back online. What's your thoughts about how perhaps the league can handle that in a safe way, considering we're still dealing with the coronavirus, testing of players and personnel? You have any insight on sort of the NBA and its plan and its impact on fans and players?
First thing I'll say is what I say every day on First Take. Safety is paramount. Safety is first and foremost. You exhaust every measure you possibly can to address the concern, so the worries are minimal compared to what they may be at this particular moment in time. It won't be eradicated until a vaccine is found. There's no question about that. But you can minimize the concerns to some degree. For example, social distancing has worked to some degree. Wearing a mask and gloves has worked to some degree. Not having fans in attendance, which they're not expected to have for these NBA playoffs, that are going to be taking place at Disney's Disney World, essentially in Orlando, Florida, starting July 31st, probably going to about the first week in October. That's going to happen. Now, for those of you that are looking at Disney World and saying, what the hell is going on here? Why are these people going there? I will remind you that Disney World is 39 miles wide. 39 miles. Right. Okay. I think it's safe to assume you could pull off social distancing to some degree.
Exactly.
If you're really committed to doing so.
Right.
If you really
try hard enough.
So we understand that. The other thing is to elevate the level of testing, the available tests available to you. Personal protection equipment, medical professionals, medical facilities, all of those things need to be addressed. We understand that that's incredibly important. But after that, let's understand that as human beings, don't allow perfect to be the enemy of the good. You can't have everything in life, okay? You guys are doctors, not me. And you're connected to the health profession, not me. And even I know that when it comes to viruses, where's the vaccine? Where's the vaccine for SARS? Where's the vaccine, for crying out loud, where's the vaccine for AIDS? We've never had it. Now, obviously, this is a different situation, and we get that. But I'm saying all of that to say, understand that when it comes to viruses, you can attribute to making something dormant, according to my understanding. But it's rare in the day that there's a quote unquote cure. Even when you take a flu shot, my understanding is you're getting a shot at the flu, okay? And basically it's building antibodies in your body so you're able to fend it off when you have it from basically doing more damage than necessary.
And it's not fail-proof. It doesn't.
That's right.
It doesn't completely, prevent you from getting the flu.
So if you know that, but you still go about the business of living your life every day, at some point you're going to have to do this. Because in a capitalistic society, you have to have people back at work. And I've said this, and I understand how unpopular it is to just flippantly say that, but I'm not saying it flippantly. I'm saying it as a matter of necessity. And when you are Black, I'm sorry, for me personally, and I know that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected African Americans in this country in drastic discrepancies compared to the white community. But what I've often said to people was this: Black people come out of the womb with things to worry about. Now, you've got a situation where 40+ million people are unemployed. They've been furloughed, they've been laid off or flat out fired, okay? I want to know what majority of those people happen to be African Americans. And you're asking people to watch as their quality of life evaporates before their very eyes while they just stay at home waiting for a vaccine when you can't even tell us when that vaccine is arrived. You got to remember, they didn't sit up there and say, we need you to stay home until June 1st and we'll have a vaccine. We need you to stay home till July 1st and we're going back to work. They didn't say any of that. They said, not only is the virus here, but don't be fooled like it's going to completely disappear once the weather gets warm. And rest assured, it'll probably come back come flu season once the weather goes in that cold direction come October, November, December. So essentially, we don't anticipate we'd be out of the woods before March of 2021. What? This country can't survive economically. We were gone for 2 months at the time when the country signed off on a $2.8 trillion stimulus package and then added an additional $500 billion to that.
Correct.
Okay, and that's with us already trillions of dollars in debt. It's not sustainable. And so from a practical standpoint, it's not that I want to get sick. It's not that I want to endanger my health or those of my family or friends and loved ones or any human being in this nation or this world for that matter. It's that at some point in time, you have to embrace the reality that when you get up out your bed to go to work, at the very least for the foreseeable future, that could span anywhere from 6 months to a year, that is a risk you are going to have to take.
And I think those of us,
have to embrace yourself.
Yeah, and I think those of us in healthcare is why we are so adamant about promoting safety and hand hygiene and wearing masks, doing things that we know that will hopefully help protect you and minimize your risk of contract any type of disease. So I agree with you. One last question. What would your 18-year-old self think about who you are today?
My 18-year-old self would be incredibly proud of what I accomplished. They would look at me, I would say, as a role model, because I strive to do things the right way, and I didn't take shortcuts en route to pulling that off. But my 18-year-old self would also sit up there and say, there's some things you could have done better. You know, I've never been married, but I'm a dad out of wedlock. That's not something that you walk around being proud of, although I'm a very proud daddy. You also think about your career and the personal sacrifices that you've made, recognizing the fact that while it's appreciative, there's a lot of moments you missed out on unnecessarily because you were grinding so hard that you didn't take times to figuratively smell those roses. It would also, my 18-year-old self would also say, you know, it's a beautiful thing, but you've also not done all that you could have done. Where's the book? You might be one of the most popular people in American history to have never written a book yet. You know, you've never told us really your story overall. You've never put pen to paper about it in its completion. You've never touched on things. The one thing you've never achieved is being a best-selling author, which is something that you said you wanted years ago, but you got sidetracked because you were accomplishing different things. But that's still something that you need to finish. And last but not least, you could still do even more than you're doing to make a difference. We've got young individuals out here putting their lives on the line, fighting for causes that could positively affect us all. And although I'm doing my part, it doesn't mean that I couldn't do more. And I think that my young self, who was a rebel to the core, would look at me and say, you've got a little timid, not comfortable, because I'm never comfortable, but you've got a little bit timid because you're distracted by so many things going on in your life. Fatherhood, your mom is gone, and you're the patriarch of the family because dad is gone too. You still got 4 older sisters. You still got 13 nieces and nephews. And because of all of those multitude of things that have distracted you, there are things that you're missing out on doing that we need you to do. So get going. Don't get tired on us now. You still got some work to do. In the end, that's what I think my 18-year-old self would say to me now.
Well, that'd be a heck of a conversation between the two of you. Listen, my friend, while I don't always appreciate your treatment of my beloved Cowboys, you know, I certainly do appreciate your honesty, your straightforward approach, and how that authenticity and commitment to excellence is what you're all about. So thank you for being a part of Here for Good.
I appreciate it, and I think you should thank me even more because I usually don't give Cowboy fans my time.
Well, that's why we talked about it after.
But I did that for you.
All right, Stephen.
All right.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Here for Good. If you liked what you heard, please leave us feedback and share our podcast link with others. Until next time, be well, everyone.